Hello everyone, today is the 17th day of Sivan, the 23rd of June, and we're going to be looking at the first reading of our new Parsha this week, Parshat Shlach. We probably all know that this Parsha is about the scouts that Moses sent to see the land of Canaan before they were to enter it, and this all backfired terribly. Instead of the scouts going to tour the land to see it, they decided that they were meant to bring back an assessment of how easy or how difficult it would be to conquer the land. This was, of course, not the purpose of their mission. The purpose of their mission was to create a yearning in the people. And I think we've talked about this in past years, no different than when you sit down to eat a meal. It's a completely different thing if you see it before you eat it, the way it's presented to you, the way it's put on a plate, the serving dishes and how it's served, and then how you eat it, compared to if you're sitting in the dark and you can't see what you're eating, even if it would be the tastiest thing. This is called that more spiritually. This has to do with who is influencing who, meaning, am I yearning for the food or is the food yearning for me? And the whole idea of seeing the meal before eating it is to actually be satisfied even before I eat it, so that when it comes time to actually chew it and place it in my mouth and digest it, I've already had my fill of it, as it were. I'm already happy with it. So this is not yearning in the usual sense to cause me to want to salivate more. That's not the point, because then I'm lower than the food. The whole idea here is that I am on top of what I am consuming. The same thing had to be with the land of Israel, as explained in Chassidus, that the yearning was meant to be that the land needs me, that the land is waiting for me, meaning that there's many, many good things to do here, and all that's needed is add me into the picture, and therefore the land is, as it were, yearning for us, not that we're yearning for the land, as one might seem to think superficially. And as we said, this backfired because the spies did not understand this. Instead, they came from the point of view of, so what will it take for us to conquer this land? And they came to the conclusion that it would be next to impossible. Unfortunately, we're suffering from the same problems today, exactly the same problems. People who don't understand how much the land needs them, and instead look at it as some kind of problem that they need to solve, some kind of issue, instead of seeing it as fulfilling God's will and what God asked of us, which is to settle the land of Israel. But we're going to focus on something a little bit different in the next few minutes, which is that there's a lot that has to do with eyesight in this parsha. In fact, the parsha begins in the first reading with the scouts who were meant to see the land. And it's a very interesting word that's used, latur et haaretz, to scout the land. But latur also means to see. And interestingly enough, even though we're reading now this parsha in the month of Sivan, the events themselves unfolded in the month of Tammuz, the next month, 13 days away from today. And in the book of formation, Sefer Yetzirah, the month of Tammuz is associated with sight, with the sense of sight. So actually Moses timed this perfectly, and it was meant to be the exact time in order to see things properly in the right way, to see them for what they are, because that is the sense of the month of Tammuz. There's the opposite, the negative side of sight. The negative aspect of sight is when one sees things not in an optimistic manner, but rather in a pessimistic manner. And in order to strengthen that negative aspect, the month of Tammuz is actually, as you know, all the months in the Jewish calendar are named for their Babylonian counterparts. Before then there were Hebrew names for some of them. We don't know the Hebrew names for all of them, but there were for some of them. And the fourth month doesn't have a Hebrew name that we know of. At least I can't recall that we do. And in Babylon it was known as Tammuz. Tammuz was the name of a god in Babylon. Of course, it went through some kind of conversion when the names of the months were brought back from the Babylonian exile to the Second Temple. But that god was the god of tragedy. It was exactly the same idea, and people would, as the prophet Jeremiah says, they would lament the Tammuz. And the tragedy was that he was like a young god who was constantly being killed and then reborn and killed and reborn. But every time he was killed, it was like seeing the death of youth. And so people would lament it, they would cry, and that was trying to look at the world from a pessimistic point of view that we all have to overcome. So really the month of Tammuz, the month of the sense of sight, was meant to be the month in which the spies, these scouts, were meant to rectify their own eyesight and be able to see the positive sides of the land of Israel, which they didn't do. How is this rectified? It's very interesting. One idea that Rav Ginsburg has discussed over the years is that we have 3 festivals, and one of the things we say in the main prayer of the festival, which is called the Musaf, the Amida of the Musaf, is V'asienu Hashem Elokeinu et birkat moadecha lechaim shalom l'simcha u'lesason. Carry over, it literally means carry over, Havaya, or God, the blessing of your festivals for good life and for peace and for joy and for merriment. We say this on each one of the 3 festivals, and what we're saying basically is that we want the joy that we've experienced during the festival to carry over to the rest of the days of the year. Now, since there's 3 festivals, we just finished 2 weeks ago Shavuot, even less than 2 weeks ago, about 10 days ago, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. When we celebrate, we commemorate the giving of the Torah, and the joy of that festival was meant to be carried all the way through the summer to Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. But specifically, there is a custom to read on Shavuot, on the Feast of Weeks, 10 days ago, the Scroll of Ruth, which tells the story of a Moabite princess who married a Jew but did not convert, and this husband of her ended up dying, and she went back to the land of Israel, which at the time was during the time of the judges, about 100 years before, maybe 80 years before Samuel the prophet, and she followed her mother-in-law, Naomi, to the land of Israel. By doing so, Ruth actually rectified the sin of the spies. Now, there's a very interesting thing. We'll discuss 2 parts of it right now. First of all, the name Ruth, which is spelled Reish Vav Taf, says the Zohar, it means that it's a reversal of the letters of the word to scout, tur. We mentioned this before, that the spies toured. It's even a word, I don't know why it's the same word in English, but it really means the same thing, to scout and to tour. And it's the same word in Hebrew, tur, latur et haaretz. There's probably a good reason for it, I don't know what it is. And Ruth, in that sense, is a rectification of the improper touring, the improper scouting that the spies did. And actually, it happened during the same time of the year, pretty much. The story, the events of Ruth, and it happened right after right after Passover, and ended pretty much in the time of Shavuot, the time of the Feast of Weeks. So that's the first important aspect that Ruth is able to rectify, meaning that the impact, the influence that reading the scroll of Ruth on the Feast of Weeks and Shavuot carries over throughout the summer months and helps us rectify our eyesight. And when you think about Ruth, it's a story of optimism, tremendous optimism. A woman who's lost everything she had, lost her husband, lost her family, lost her possessions. And Naomi, same thing. She starts off very pessimistic about her future, but then, thanks to Ruth, she switches the way that she looks at things, and she becomes optimistic. In the beginning, she called herself bitter. She said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore, call me bitter." But then, when she sees that Ruth is able somehow to rebuild their lives in Bethlehem, and she's able to marry the judge of that time, Boaz, and she has a child from him, and Naomi raises this child, and this becomes the grandfather of King David. She's restored to her optimism. There's a second thing that the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, says. One of the blessings in the Amidah is the gathering of the exiles. We pray for this 3 times a day, that God should gather all the exiles of the Jewish people back to the land of Israel. And the acronym, the initials of that blessing, Mekabetz Nidchei Amo Yisrael, he who gathers the dispersed of his people Israel, spells Naomi. And Naomi herself is one might say, the person who's returned to the land of Israel from exile in Moab, where she was with her husband, and he passed away and her sons passed away. When she came back, it's the story of the transformation from the pessimism of that initially comes with going to the land of Israel, and then this churn, this rectification that causes her to see things differently. So really, this whole week is dedicated to this topic of how do we see our lives, how to see things optimistically. This is the best week of the year to work on this, to change our outlook, to start seeing things positively. And I just want to end with one small point. The Torah begins this portion, Shlach, with the story of the spies who saw negatively. And it ends with the mitzvah, the commandment of putting on tzitzis, putting on fringes on the ends of our 4-cornered garments. And these fringes are meant to be looked at. Uritem otam. You should see them. And seeing them every day is a skula, it's a charm for changing one's outlook, for seeing things in an optimistic manner. Maybe simply because they remind us of all the opportunities we have in life, regardless of what our state is, to continue to follow God's commandments. And this is the real purpose of life. This is the real reason for which we spend as many years as we do in this world, which sometimes seem futile, sometimes seem like they have no purpose, they seem like they have no end. But the truth is that when a person focuses on the fact that the meaning of life comes from following God's directives, from following the Torah's commandments, by connecting to the Torah, by doing good deeds, so then every type of life that a person has to live can become optimistic and become something positive. So thank you for joining today. I hope to be able to see you during the rest of the week. All the best.